One.
Hello, comrades. Today we will be reading Wretched of the Earth on violence. If any of you guys want to read as well, if I get too tired, that's okay. We're gonna try doing 20 to 25 pages so far, and we see how that goes. So, on violence. National liberation, national reawakening, restoration of the nation to the people or commonwealth, whatever the name used, whatever the latest expression, decolonization is always a violent event. At whatever level we study in, individual encounters a change of name for a sports club, the guest list at a cocktail party, members of a police force, or the board of directors of a state or private bank. Decolonization is quite simply the substitution of one species, quote unquote, of humankind by another. The substitution is unconditional, absolute, total, and seamless. We could go on to portray the rise of a new nation, the establishment of a new state, its diplomatic relations, and its economic and political orientation. But instead, we have decided to describe the kind of tabu tabula rus tabula rasa, I believe I pronounce it, which from the outset defines any decolonization. What is what is singularly important is that it starts from the very first day with the basic claims of the colonized. In actual fact, proof of success lies in a social fabric that has been changed inside out. This change is extraordinarily important because it is desired, clamored for, and demanded. The need for this change exists in a raw, repressed, and reckless state in the lives and consciousnesses of colonized men and women. But the eventuality of such a change is also experienced as a terrifying future in the consciousnesses of another species of men and women, the colonists. Decolonization, which sets out to change the order of the world, is clearly an agenda for total disorder, but it cannot be accomplished by the wave of a magic wand, a natural cataclysm, or a gentleman's agreement. Decolonization, we know, is an historical process. In other words, it can only be understood, it can only be find its significance and become self-coherent insofar as we can discern the history-making movement which gives it from and substance. Decolonization is the encounter between two cognitively antagonistic forces that in fact owe their singularity to the kind of reification secreted and nurtured by the colonial situation. Their first confrontation was colored by violence and their cohabitation, or rather, the exploitation of the colonized by the colonizer, continue at the point of the bayonet and under cannon fire. The colonist and the colonized are old acquaintances, and consequently, the colonist is right when he says he knows them. It is the colonist who fabricated and continues to fabricate the colonized subject. The colonist derives his validity, i.e., his wealth, from the colonial system. Decolonization never goes unnoticed, for it focuses on and fundamentally alters being and transforms the spectator crushed to a nonsensical, non-essential state into a privileged actor, captured in a virtually grandiose fashion by the spotlight of history. It infuses a new rhythm, specific to a new generation of men, with a new language and a new humanity. Decolonization is truly the creation of new men, but such a creation cannot be attributed to a supernatural power. The thing colonized becomes a man through the very process of liberation. Decolonization, therefore, implies the urgent need to thoroughly challenge the colonial situation. Its definition can, if we want to describe it accurately, be summed up to the well-known words, the last shall be the first. Decolonization is verification of this. At a descriptive level, therefore, any decolonization is a success. In its bare reality, decolonization reeks of red hot cannonballs and bloody knives. For the last can be the first only after a murderous and decisive confrontation between the two protagonists. This determination to have the last move up to the front, to have them clamber up too quickly, say some. The famous echelons of an organized society can only succeed by resorting to every means, including, of course, violence. You do not disorganize a society, however primitive it may be, with such an agenda if you are not determined from the very start to smash every obstacle encountered. The colonized, who have made up their mind to make such an agenda into a driving force, have been prepared for violence from time immemorial. As soon as they are born, it is obvious to them that their cramped world, riddled with taboos, can only be challenged by out violence. The colonial world is a compartmentalized world. It is obviously as superfluous to recall the existence of quote unquote native towns and European towns, of schools for natives and schools for Europeans, as it is to recall apartheid in South Africa. Yet if we penetrate inside the compartmentalization, we shall at least bring to light some of its key aspects. By penetrating its geographical configuration, let me zoom in, and classification, we shall be able to delineate the backbone in which the decolonized society is recognized. The colonized world is a world divided in two. The dividing line of the border is represented by the barracks and the police stations. And in the colonies, the official, legitimate agent, the spokesperson for the colonizer, and the regime for oppression is the police officer or the soldier. In capitalist societies, education, whether secular or religious, the teaching of moral reflexes handed down from father to son, the exemplary integrity of the workers, decorated after 50 years of loyal and faithful service, the fostering of love for harmony and wisdom, those aesthetic forms of respect for the status quo inside in the exploited a mood of submission and inhibition, which considerably erases the task of the agents of law. Sorry. And order. In capitalist countries, a multitude of sermonizers, counselors, and confusion mongers intervene between the exploited and the authorities. In colonial regions, however, the proximity and frequent direct intervention by the police and the military ensure the colonized are kept under close scrutiny and contained by rifle butts and napalm. We have seen how the government's agents use a language of pure violence. The agent does not alleviate oppression or mask domination. He displays and demonstrates them with the clear conscience of the law enforcer and brings violence into the homes and minds of the colonized subject. The native sector is not complementary to the European sector. The two confront each other, but not in the service of a higher unity, governed by a purely Aristotelian logic. They follow the dictates of mutual exclusion. There is no conciliation possible. One of them is superfluous. The colonist sector is a sector built to last, all stone and steel. It's a sector of lights and paved roads where the trash cans constantly overflow with strange and wonderful garbage, undreamed of leftovers. The colonists' feet can never be glimpsed, except perhaps in the sea, but then you can never get close enough. They are protected by solid shoes in a sector where the streets are clean and smooth, without a pothole, without a stone. The colonist sector is a sated, sluggish sector. Its belly is permanently full of good things. The colonist sector is a white folk sector, a sector of foreigners. The colonized sector, or at least the native quarters, the shanty towns, the Medina, the reservation, disreput is a disreputable place inhabited by disreputable people. You're born anywhere, anyhow. You die anywhere from anything. It's a world with no space. People are piled one on top of another. The shacks squeeze tightly together. The colonized sector is a famished sector, hungry for bread, meat, shoes, coal, and light. The colonized sectors is a sector that crouches and cowers, a sector on its knees, a sector that is prostrate. It's a sector of black people, a sector of towel heads. The gaze that the colonized subject casts at the colonist's sector is a look of lust, a look of envy. Dreams of possession, every type of possession, of sitting at the colonist's table and sleeping in his bed, preferably with his wife. The colonized man is an envious man. The colonist is aware of this as he catches the furtive glance and, constantly on his guard, realizes bitterly that they want to take our place. And it's true, there is no one colonized subject who at least once a day does not dream of taking the place of the colonist. This compartmentalized world, this world divided in two, is inhabited by different species. The singularity of the colonial context lies in the fact that economic reality, inequality, and enormous disparities in lifestyles never manage to mask the human reality. Looking at the immediacies of the colonial context, it is clear that what divides this world is first and foremost what species, what race one belongs to. In the colonies, the economic infrastructure is also a superstructure. The cause is effect. You are rich because you are white. You are white because you are rich. This is why Marxist analysis should always be slightly stretched when it comes to addressing the colonial issue. It is not just a concept of the pre-capitalist society, so effectively studied by Marx, which needs to be re-examined here. The serf is essentially different from the knight, but a reference to divine right is needed to justify this difference in status. In the colonies, the foreigners imposed himself using his cannons and machines. Despite the success of his pacification, in spite of his appropriation, the colonist always remains a foreigner. The factories, the estates, or the bank account which primarily characterize the ruling class. The ruling species is first and foremost the outsider from elsewhere, different from the indigenous population, the others. The violence which governed the ordering of the colonial world, which tirelessly punctuated the destruction of the indigenous social fabric and demolished unchecked the systems of reference of the country's economy, lifestyles, and modes of dress. This same violence will be vindicated and appropriated when, taking history into our own hands, the colonized swarm into the forbidden cities, to blow the colonial world to smithereens in henceforth a clear image within the grasp and imagination of every colonized subject. To to dis to dislocate the colonial world does not mean that once the borders have been eliminated, there will be a right of way between the two sectors. To destroy the colonial world means nothing less than demolishing the colonist sector, burying it deep within the earth, or banishing it from the territory. Indeed, challenging the colonial world is not a rational confrontation of viewpoints. It is not a discourse on the universal, but the impassioned claim by the colonized that their world is fundamentally different. The colonial world is a Manichean world. The colonist is not content with physically limiting the space of the colonized. With the help of his agents of law and order, as if to illustrate the totalitarian nature of colonial exploitation, the colonist turns the colonized into a kind of quintessence of evil. Colonized society is not merely portrayed as a society without values. The colonist is not content with stating that the colonized world has lost its values or worse, never possessed any. The native is declared impervious to ethics, representing not only the absence of values, but also the negation of values. He is, dare we say it, the enemy of values. In other words, absolute evil. Yep, dehumanization and demonization. A coercive element, destroying everything within his reach. A corrupting element, distorting everything which involves aesthetics or morals. An agent of malevolent powers, an unconscious and incurable instrument of blind forces. And and Monsieur Mier could say in all seriousness in the French National Assembly that we should not let the Republic be defiled by the penetration of the Algerian people. Values are, in fact, irreversibly poisoned and infected as soon as they come into contact with the colonized. The customs of the colonized, their traditions, their myths, especially their myths, are the very mark of this indigence and innate depravity. That is why we should place DDT, which destroys parasites, carriers of disease, on the same level as Christianity, which roots out heresy, natural impulses, and evil. The decline of yellow fever and the advances made by evangelizing form part of the same balance sheet. But triumphant reports by the missions, in fact, tell us how deep the seeds of alienation have been sown among the colonized. I'm talking of Christianity, and this should come as no surprise to anybody. The church in the colonies is a white man's church, a foreigner's church. It is not called to colonize to the ways of God, but to the ways of the white man, to the ways of the master, the ways of the oppressor. And as we know in this story, many are called, but few are chosen. Sometimes I don't know how to pronounce that. Sometimes this Manichaeism reaches its logical conclusion and dehumanizes the colonized subject. In plain talk, he is reduced to the state of an animal. And consequently, when the colonist speaks of the colonized, he uses zoological terms. Allusion is made to the slithery movement of the yellow race, the odors from the native quarters, to the hordes, the stink, the swarming, the seething, and the gesticulations. In his endeavors at description and finding the right word, the colonist refers constantly to the bestiary. The European seldom has a problem with figures of speech, but the colonized, who immediately grasp the intention of the colonists and the exact case being made against them, know instantly what he is thinking. This explosive population growth, those hysterical masses, those blank faces, those shapeless, obese bodies, this headless, tailless cohort, these children who seem not to belong to anyone, this indolence sprawling under the sun, this vegetating existence, all of this is part of the colonial vocabulary. General de Guillet speaks of the yellow multitudes, the Monsieur Muric of the black, brown, and yellow hordes that will soon invade our shores. The colonized know all all that and roar with laughter every time they hear themselves called an animal by the other, for they know they are not animals. And at the very moment when they discover their humanity, they begin to sharpen their weapons to secure its victory. As soon as the colonized begin to strain at the leash and to pose a threat to the colonists, they are assigned a series of good souls who, in the symposiums of culture, spill out the specificity and richness of Western values. That every time the issue of Western values crops up, the colonized grow tense and their muscles size up. During the period of decolonization, the colonialized are called upon to be reasonable. They're offered rock solid values. They are told in great detail that decolonization should not mean regression, and that they must rely on values which have proved to be reliable and worthwhile. Not Now it so happens that when the colonized hear a speech on Western culture, they draw their machetes, or at last check to see they are close to hand. The supremacy of white values is stated with such violence. The victorious confrontation of these values with the lifestyle and beliefs of the colonized is so important and so impregnated that aggressiveness that as a countermeasure, the colonized rightly make a mockery of them whenever they are mentioned. In the colonial context, the colonists only quits undermining the colonized once the latter have proclaimed loud and clear that white values reign supreme. Yeah. In the period of decolonization, the colonized masses thumb their noses at these very values, showing them with insults and vomit them up. Such an occurrence normally goes unseen because during decolonization, certain colonized intellectuals have established a dialogue with the bourgeoisie of the colonizing country. During this period, the indigenous population is seen as a blurred mass. The few native personalities whom the colonists bourgeois have chanced to encounter have had insufficient impact to alter their current perception and nuance their thinking. During the period of liberation, however, the colonist bourgeoisie practically seeks contact with the colonized elite. It is with this elite that the famous dialogue on values is established. When the colonist bourgeoisie realizes it is impossible to maintain its domination over the colonies, it decides to wage a a rearguard campaign in the fields of culture, values, and technology, etc. Yep, revisionism. But what we should never forget is that the immense majority of colonized people are impervious to such issues. For a colonized for the for a colonized people, the most essential value, because it is the most meaningful, is first and foremost the land, which must provide bread and, naturally, dignity. But this dignity has nothing to do with human dignity. The colonized subject has never heard of such an ideal. All he has ever seen on his land is that he can be arrested, beaten, and starved with impunity. And no sermonizer on morals, no priest has ever stepped in to bear the blows in his place or share his bread. For the colonized, to be a moralist quite plainly means silencing the arrogance of the colonist, breaking his spiral of violence, in a word ejecting him outright from the picture. Yep. The famous dictum which states that all men are equal will find its illustration in the colonies only when the colonized subject states he is equal to the colonist. Taking it a step further, he is determined to fight to be more than the colonist. In fact, he has already decided to take his place. As we have seen, is the collapse of an entire moral and material universe. The intellectual who, for his part, has adopted the abstract universal values of the colonizer is prepared to fight so the colonist and colonized can live in peace in a new world. But what he does not see, because precisely colonialism and all its modes of thought have seeped into him, is that the colonist is no longer interested in staying on and coexisting once the colonial context has disappeared. It is no It is no coincidence that even before any negotiation between the Algerian government and the French government, the so-called liberal European minority has already made its position clear. It is clamoring for dual citizenship, nothing less. By sticking to the abstract, the colonist is being forced to make a very substantial leap into the unknown. Let's be honest, the colonist knows perfectly well that no jargon is a substitute for reality. The colonized subject thus discovers that his life, his breathing, and his heartbeats are the same as the colonists. He discovers that the skin of a colonist is not worth more than the natives. In other words, his world receives a fundamental jolt. The colonized revolutionary new assurance stems from this. If, in fact, my life is worth as much as the colonists, his look can no longer strike fear into me or nail me to the spot, and his voice can no longer petrify me. I am no longer uneasy in his presence. In reality, to hell with him. Not only does his presence no longer bother me, but I am already preparing to waylay him in such a way that soon he will have no other solution but to flee. The colonial context, as we have said, is characterized by the dichotomy it inflicts in the world. Decolonization unifies this world by a radical decision to remove its heterogeneity by unifying it on the grounds of nation and sometimes race. To quote the biting words of Senegalese patriots on the maneuver of their president Senghor, we ask for the Africanization of the top jobs, and all Senghor does is Africanize the Europeans, meaning that the colonized can see right away if decolonization is taking place or not. The minimum demand is that the last become the first. But the colonized intellectual introduces a variation on this demand, and in fact, there seems to be no lack of motivation to fill senior positions as administrators, technicians, and experts. The colonized, however, equate this nepotism with acts of sabotage, and is not unusual to hear them declare, "What is the point of being independent then? Wherever an authentic liberation struggle has been fought, wherever the blood of the people has been shed and the armed phase has lasted long enough to encourage the intellectuals to withdraw to their rank and file base, there is an effective eradication of the superstructure borrowed by these intellectuals from the colonist bourgeois circles. It in it in its narcissistic monologue, the colonist bourgeoisie, by the way of its academics, had implanted in the minds of the colonized that the essential values, meaning Western values, remain eternal despite all errors attributable to man. The colonized intellectual accepted that the co co cogency of these ideas, and there in the back of his mind stood a sentinel on duty guarding the Greco-Roman pedestal. But during the struggle for liberation, when the colonized intellectual touches base again with his people, his artificial sentinel is smashed to smithereens. All the Mediterranean values, the triumph of the individual, of enlightenment and beauty, turn into pale, lifeless trinkets. All those discourses appear a jumble of dead words. Those values which seem to ennoble the soul prove worthless because they have nothing in common with the real life struggle in which the people are engaged. And first among them is individualism. The colonized intellectual formed from his masters that the individuals must assert himself. The colonist bourgeoisie hammered into the colonized mind the notion of a society of individuals where each is locked in his subjectivity, where wealth lies in thought. But the colonized intellectual who is lucky enough to bunker down with the people during the liberation struggle will soon discover the falsity of this theory. Involvement in the organization of the struggle will already introduce him to a different vocabulary: brother, sister, comrade are words outlawed by the colonist bourgeoisie because in their thinking, my brother is my wallet and my comrade my scheming. In a kind of auto de fe, the colonized intellectual witnesses the destruction of all his idols, egoism, arrogant recrimination, the idiotic, childish need to have the last word. This colonized intellectual, pulverized by colonist culture, will also discover the strength of the village assemblies, the power of the people's commissions, and the extraordinary productiveness of neighborhood and section and committee meetings. Personal interests are now the collective interest because in reality, everyone will be discovered by the French legionnaires and consequently massacred, or else everyone will be saved. In such a context, the every man for himself concept, the atheist's form of salvation, is prohibited. Self criticism has been much talked about recently, but few realize that it was first of all an African institution, whether it be the DMS of North Africa or the Palaverse of West Africa. Tradition has it that disputes which break out in a village are worked out in public. But by this I mean collective self-criticism with a touch of humor because everyone is relaxed, because in the end we all want the same thing. The intellectual sheds in the end we all want the intellectual sheds all that calculating, all those strange silences, those ulterior motives, that devious thinking and secrecy as he gradually plunges deeper among the people. In this respect, then we can genuinely say that the community has already triumphed and exudes its own light, its own reason. By when decolonization occurs in regions where the liberation struggle has not yet made its impact sufficiently felt, here are some here are the same smart Alex, the sly, shrewd intellectuals whose behavior and ways of thinking, picked up from their rubbing shoulders with the colonist bourgeoisie, have remained intact. Spoiled children of yesterday's colonialism and today's governing powers, they oversec the looting of the few national resources, ruthless in their scheming and what is that word? And logic, pilfering. They use the poverty now nationwide to work their way to the top through import-export holdings, limited companies, playing the stock market, and nepotism. They insist on the nationalization of business transactions, i.e., reserving contracts and business deals for nationals. Their doctrine is to proclaim the absolute need for nationalizing the theft of the nation. In this barren national phase, in the so-called period of austerity, their success at plundering the nation swiftly sparks anger and violence from the people. And the present international and African context, the poverty-stricken and independent population achieves a social consciousness at a rapidly accelerating pace. This, the petty individualists who will soon find out for themselves. In order to assimilate the culture of the oppressor and venture into his fold, the colonized subject has had to pawn some of his own intellectual possessions. For instance, one of the things he has had to assimilate is the way of the colonist the bourgeoisie thinks. This is apparent in the colonized intellectual's inaptitude to engage in dialogue, for he is unable to mark himself inessential when confronted with a purpose or idea. On the other hand, when he operates among the people, he is constantly awestruck. He is literally disarmed by their good faith and integrity. He is then constantly at risk of becoming a demagogue. He turns into a kind of mimic man who nods his assent to every word by the people, transformed by him into an arbiter of truth. By the fella, the unemployment and the starving do not lay claim to truth. They do not say they represent the truth because they are the truth in their very being. During this period, during this period, the intellectual behaves objectively like a vulgar opportunist. He's maneuvering, in fact, his maneuvering, in fact, is still at work. The people would never think of rejecting him or cutting the ground from under his feet. What the people want is for everything to be pooled together. The colonized intellectual's insertion into this human tide will find itself on hold because of his curious obsession with detail. It is not that the people are opposed to analysis. They appreciate clarification, understand the reasoning behind an argument, and like to see where they are going. That at the start of his cohabitation with the people, the colonized intellectual gives priority to detail and tends to forget the very purpose of the struggle to defeat the defeat of colonialism. Swept along by the many facets of the struggle, he tends to concentrate on local tasks undertaken zealously by almost always too pedantically. He does not always see the overall picture. He introduces the notion of discipline, specialized areas, and fields into the awesome mixer and grinder called People's Revolution. Committed to certain frontline issues, he tends to lose sight of the unity of the movement, and the event of failure at the local level, he succumbs to doubt, even despair. The people, on the other hand, take a global stance from the very start. Bread and land. How do we go about getting bread and land? And this is and this stubborn, apparently limited, narrow-minded aspect of the people is finally the most rewarding and effective working model. The question of truth must always be taken into consideration. For the people, only fellow nationals are ever owed the truth. No absolute truth, no discourse on the transparency of the soul can erode this position. In answer to the lie of the colonial situation, the colonized subject responds with a lie. Behavior towards fellow nationalists is open and honest, but strained and indecipherable towards the colonist. Truth is what hastens the dislocation of the colonial regime, what fosters the emergence of the nation. Truth is what protects the natives and undoes the foreigners. In the colonial context, there is no truthful behavior, and good is quite simply what hurts them most. We we must see we have seen therefore that the I still don't know what that is, that the Manichaeism that first governed the colonial society is maintained intact during the period of decolonization. In fact, the colonist never ceases to be the enemy, the antagonist. In plain words, public enemy number one. The oppressor, the incensed in a sector creates the spiral of domination, exploitation, and looting. In the other sector, the colonized subject lies coiled and robbed, and fuels as best as he can the spiral which moves seamlessly from the shores of the colony to the palaces and docks of the metropolis. And this petrified zone, not a ripple on the surface, the palm trees sway against the clouds, the waves of the sea lap against the shore, the raw materials come and go, legitimating the colonist's presence. While more dead than alive, the colonized subject crouches forever in the same old dream. The colonist makes history. His life is an epic, an odyssey. He is invested with the very beginning. We made this land. He is the guarantor for its existence. Could someone else read it if that's okay?
I'd be glad to take a turn.
Hell yeah.
Okay, so you're on page 15?
Yep, page 15. If we leave, that's where we are right now.
Okay. I'm gonna use my book because my eyes aren't quite what
Gotcha.
it used to be, and I haven't had my eye exam yet. Where did you leave off at?
If we leave,
If we leave.
yeah,
About how far down the page is that?
not too far. It's on page 15. If we leave, all will be lost.
Oh yeah, there we are. He is the guarantor for its existence. If we leave, all will be lost, and this land will return to the dark ages. Opposite him, listless beings wasted away by fevers and consumed by ancestral customs compose a virtually petrified background to the innovative dynamism of colonial mercantilism. I've got to say, man, besides just being an incredible philosopher, his writing's incredible. He can just paint a picture so vividly.
Indeed, his writings are really amazing. Oh, by the way, in case you didn't know, we're gonna be stopping around page 20 to page 25, whichever you want to leave at first, because
Okay.
There aren't any chapters here. It's mostly just like parts, and the
Okay.
parts are like really long.
Cool. The colonist makes history and he knows it, and because he refers constantly to the history of his metropolis, he plainly indicates that here he is the extension of this metropolis. The history he writes is therefore not the history of the country he is despoiling, but the history of his own nations looting, raping, and starving to death. The immobility to which the colonized subject is condemned can be challenged only if he decides to put an end to the history of colonization and the history of despoilization in order to bring life to the history of the nation, the history of decolonization. A world compartmentalized, Manichaean and petrified, a world of statues, the statue of the general who led the conquest, the statue of the engineer who built the bridge, a world cocksure of itself, crushing with its stoniness the backbones of those who scarred by the whip. That is the colonial world. The colonial subject is a man pinned in. Apartheid is but one method of compartmentalizing the colonial world. The first thing the colonial subject learns is to remain in his place and not overstep its limits. Hence, the dreams of the colonial subject are muscular dreams, dreams of action, dreams of aggressive vitality. I dream I am jumping, swimming, running, and climbing. I dream I burst out laughing. I am leaping across a river and chased by a pack of cars that never catches up with me. During colonialization, the colonialized subject frees himself night after night between 9 in the evening and 6 in the morning. Wow. I mean, Frantz Fanon was a psychologist, so he's really describing in very Jungian terms the experience of that. Wow.
Yeah.
The colonized subject will first train this aggressiveness sedimented in his muscle against his own people. This is the period when black turns on black and police officers and magistrates don't know which way to turn when faced with the surprising surge of North African criminality. We shall see later what should be made of this phenomenon. Confronted with a colonial order, the colonized subject is in a permanent state of tension. The colonist world is a hostile world, a world which excludes, yet at the same time incites envy. You have seen how the colonized always dreams of taking the colonist's place, not of becoming a colonist, but of replacing him. This hostile, oppressive, and aggressive world bulldozing the colonized masses represents not only the hell they would like to escape as quickly as possible, but a paradise within arm's reach, guarded by ferocious watchdogs. The colonized subject is constantly on his guard. Confused by the myriad signs of the colonial world, he never knows whether he is out of line. Confronted with a world configured by the colonizer, the colonized subject is always presumed guilty. The colonized does not accept his guilt, but rather considers it a kind of curse, a sort of Damocles. But deep down, the colonized subject acknowledges no authority. He is dominated, but not domesticated. He is made to feel inferior, but by no means convinced of his inferiority. He patiently waits for the colonist to let his guard down and then jumps on him. The muscles of the colonized are always tensed. It is not that he is anxious or terrorized, but he is always ready to change his role as game for that of the hunter. The colonized subject is a persecuted man who is forever dreaming of becoming the persecutor. The symbols of society, such as the police force, bugle calls in the barracks, military parades, and the flying flag aloft, serve not only as inhibitors, but also as stimulants. They do not signify stay where you are, but rather get ready to do the right thing. In fact, if ever the colonized subject begins to doze off or forget, the colonist's arrogance and preoccupation with testing the solidity of the colonial system will remind him on so many occasions that the great showdown cannot be postponed indefinitely. This impulse to take the colonist's place maintains a constant muscular tonus. It is a known fact that under certain emotional circumstances, an obstacle actually escalates him. The relationship between colonist and colonized is one of physical mass. Against the greater number of the colonist pits his force. The colonist is an exhibitionist. His safety concerns lead him to remind the colonized out loud, "Here, I am the master." The colonist keeps the colonized in a state of rage, which he prevents from boiling over. The colonized are caught in the tightly knit web of colonialism. But we have seen how on the inside the colonist achieves only a pseudo-petrification. The muscular tension of the colonized periodically erupts in a bloody fighting between tribes, clans, and individuals. At the individual level, we witness a genuine negation of common sense. Whereas the colonist or police officer can beat the colonized subject day in and day out, insult him, and shove him to his knees, it is not uncommon to see the colonized subject draw his knife at the slightest hostile or aggressive look from another colonized subject. For the colonized subject's last resort is to defend his personality against his fellow countrymen. Internecine feuds merely perpetuate age-old grudges entrenched in memory. By throwing himself muscle and soul into his blood feuds, the colonized subject endeavors to convince himself that colonialism has never existed, that everything is as it used to be, and history marches on. Here we grasp the full significance of the all too familiar head in the sand behavior at a collective level, as if this collective immersion in a fratricidal bloodbath suffices to mask the obstacle and postpone the inevitable alternative, the inevitable emergence of the armed struggle against colonialism. So one of the ways the colonized subject releases his muscular tension is through the very real collective self-destruction of these internecine feuds. Such behavior represents a death wish in the face of danger, a suicidal conduct, which reinforces the colonist's existence and domination and reassures him that such men are not rational. The colonized subject also manages to lose sight of the colonist through religion. Fatalism relieves the oppressor of all responsibility, since the cause of wrongdoing, poverty, and the inevitable can be attributed to God. The individual thus accepts the devastation decreed by God, grovels in front of the colonist, bows to the hand of fate, and mentally readjusts to acquire the serenity of stone. Wow. In the meantime,
That's
however,
powerful.
yeah. And it just makes me think so much about how religion is being used as a cudgel in the culture war right now.
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly. He just goes deep throttle into this. It's just because in fact I believe that's what the Black Panther talked about. How they engaged in cultural revolution because due to bourgeois and colonized way of thinking, oppressed people are think that that this has just always been the way it's been. That nothing has changed, and the reason why things are so shitty, it's because they've always been this way. But that's not true. And he just illustrates that perfectly. It's just his works are powerful.
yeah, I mean, he was just an incredible writer, just that alone. I mean, as a social scientist, but
Mm-hmm.
wow. Um, does anybody else want to take a turn reading, by the way? How's everybody else doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm happy.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll keep going then. In the meantime, however, life goes on, and the colonized subject draws on the terrifying myths that are so prolific in underdeveloped societies as inhibitions for his aggressiveness. Malevolent spirits who emerge every time you put one foot wrong. Leopard men, snake men, six-legged dogs, zombies, a whole never-ending gamut of animalcules or giants that encircle the colonized with a realm of taboos, barriers, and inhibitions far more terrifying than the colonialist world. Wow. This magical superstructure that permeates the indigenous society has a very precise function in the way the libido works. One of the characteristics, in fact, of underdeveloped society is that the libido is primarily a matter for the group and family. Anthropologists have amply described societies where the man who dreams he has sexual intercourse with a woman other than his own must publicly confess his dream and pay the penalty in kind or in several days' work to the husband or the injured family party, which proves, by the way, that so-called prehistorical societies attach great importance to the unconscious. Fascinating. In scaring me, no, in scaring me, the atmosphere of myths and magic operates like an undeniable reality. In terrifying me, it incorporates me into the traditions and history of my land and ethnic group. But at the same time, I am reassured and granted a civil status and identification. The secret sphere in underdeveloped countries is a collective sphere that falls exclusively within the realm of magic. By entangling me in this inextricable web where gestures are repeated with a secular limpidity, my very own world, our very own world, thus perpetuates itself. Zombies, believe
Wow.
me, are more terrifying than colonists. And the problem now is not whether to fall in line with the armor-plated world of colonialism, but to think twice before urinating, spitting, or going out in the dark. The magical supernatural powers prove to be surprisingly ego-boosting. The colonists' powers are infinitely shrunk, stamped by foreignness. There is no real reason to fight them because what really matters is that the mythical structures contain far more terrifying adversaries. It is evident that everything is reduced to a permanent confrontation at the level of fantasy. In the liberation struggle, however, this people who were once relegated to the realm of the imagination, victims of unspeakable terrors, but content to lose themselves in hallucinatory dreams, are thrown into disarray, reform, and amid blood and tears give birth to very real and urgent issues, giving food to the mujahideen, stationing lookouts, helping deprived families, taking over from the slain or imprisoned husband. Such are the practical tasks that people are asked to undertake in the liberation struggle. In the colonial world, the colonized affectivity is kept on edge like a running sore flinching from a caustic agent, and the psyche retracts, is obliterated, and finds an outlet through muscular spasms that have caused many an expert to classify the colonized as hysterical. This overexcited affectivity, spied on by invisible guardians who constantly communicate with the core of the personality, takes an erotic delight in the muscular deflation of the crisis. Another aspect of the colonized affectivity can be seen when it is drained of energy by the ecstasy of dance. Any study of the colonial world, therefore, must include an understanding of the phenomenon of dance and possession. The colonized way of relaxing is precisely this muscular orgy during which the most brutal aggressiveness and impulsive violence are channeled, transformed, and spirited away. The dance circle is a permissive circle. It protects and empowers. At a fixed time and a fixed date, men and women assemble in a given place and under the solemn gaze of the tribe launch themselves into a seemingly disarticulated but in fact ritualized pantomime where the exorcism, liberation, and expression of a community are grandiosely and spontaneously played out through shaking of the head, back and forth thrusts of the body. Sounds a little bit like the Pentecostal church I grew up in back in Kentucky, actually.
I'm a little bit confused. What's he referencing here exactly?
He's talking about tribal religion and how tribal religion kind of got co-opted by colonial religion.
Oh, okay.
And he's doing it in very poetic, terms with, really, yeah, it's a beautiful piece of poetically written anthropology kind of.
It is.
As the section kind of explores how even localized myth gets co-opted.
Exactly. It's kind of it's in a lot of ways it's kind of disgusting, like how certain dances in the global South have been perverted and sexualized by the colonizers. It's
That's
really
fascinating.
disgusting. Yeah.
Wow. All right, how are we doing on time?
We're doing pretty good. If you want, we can end. If you want, we can end it here on page 20, or you can, or we can, or you can read up until page 25, whichever one works. Either one.
Okay, I can go a few pages more here, and I'll just find a break in the page there. You see, the hillock which has been climbed as if to get closer to the moon, the riverbank which has been descended whenever the dance symbolizes ablution, washing, and purification are sacred places. Everything is permitted, for in fact, the sole purpose of the gathering is to let the supercharged libido and the stifled aggressiveness spew out volcanically. Symbolic killings, figurative cavalcades, and imagined multiple murders. Everything has to come out. The ill humors steep out tumultuous as lava flows. One step further and we find ourselves in deep possession. In fact, these are organized seances of possession and dispossession, vampirism, possessions by jinns, zombies, legba, the illustrious god of voodoo. Such a disintegration, dissolution, or splitting of the personality plays a key regulating role in ensuring the stability of the colonized world. On the way there, these men and women were stamping impatiently, their nerves on edge. On the way back, the village returns to serenity, peace, and stillness. During the struggle for liberation, there is a singular loss of interest in these rituals. With his back to the wall, the knife at his throat, or to be more exact, the electrode on his genitals, the colonized subject is bound to stop telling stories. That makes me think of the book we were reading in the
Ojibwa
Second Rainbow
Warrior.
Coalition book club about the children that were removed from the Native American children that were removed from their families and kind of like de-educated almost.
Yeah, it just kind of shows, it just kind of this really just illustrates how the colonizers know how culture and religion is a tool of empowerment and liberation, and how the best way to subjugate, exploit, and oppress a group of people, you take away that from them. You take away their cultures, their story, their language. You take that away from them, because if you take away that, you take away that empowerment, and they know that.
Wow. Let's see. Okay, I'll read to a stopping point here. After years of unreality, after wallowing in the most extraordinary phantasms, and it also kind of, we talk sometimes in Marxian dialectics about idealism versus realism.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting look about the way that religious disassociation functions, both in terms of collectively processing trauma, but also causing people to get stuck in a powerless mode sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. It's really fascinating, honestly.
Yeah. During the struggle for liberation, there's a singular, after years of unreality, after wallowing in the most extraordinary phantasms, the colonized subject, machine gun at the ready, finally confronts the only force which challenges his very being, colonialism. And the young colonized subject who grows up in an atmosphere of fire and brimstone has no scruples mocking zombie ancestors, two-headed horses, corpses woken from the dead, and jinns who, taking advantage of a yawn, slip inside the body. The colonized subject discovers reality and transforms it through his praxis, his deployment of violence, and his agenda for liberation. We have seen that this violence throughout the colonized world, although constantly on edge, runs on empty. We have seen it channeled through the emotional release of dance and possession. We have seen it exhaust itself in fratricidal struggles. The challenge now is to seize this violence as it realigns itself. Whereas it once reveled in myths and contrived ways to commit collective suicide, a fresh set of circumstances will now enable it to change directions. From the point of view of political tactics and history, the liberation of the colonies poses a theoretical problem of crucial importance at the current time. When can it be said that the situation is ripe for a national liberation movement? What should be the first line of action? Because decolonization comes in many shapes, reason wavers and abstains from declaring what is a true decolonization and what is not. We shall see that for the politically committed, urgent decisions are needed on means and tactics, direction, organization. Anything else is but blind voluntarism with the terribly reactionary risks this implies. What are the forces in the colonial period which offer new channels, new agents of empowerment for the violence of the colonized? First and foremost, the political parties and the intellectual and business elite. However, what is characteristic of certain political groups is that they are strong on principles but abstain from issuing marching orders. During the colonial period, the activities of these nationalist political parties are purely for electioneering purposes and amount to no more than a series of philosophical political discourses on the subject of the rights of peoples to self-determination, the human rights of dignity and freedom from hunger, and the countless declarations of the principle of one man, one vote. The nationalist political parties never insist on the need for confrontation precisely because their aim is not the radical overthrow of the system. Pacifist and law-abiding partisans, in fact, of order, the new order, these political groups bluntly ask of the colonialist bourgeois what to them is essential. Give us more power. On the specific issue of violence, the elite are ambiguous. They are violent in their words and reformist in their attitudes. While the bourgeois nationalist political leaders say one thing, they make it quite clear that it is not what they are really thinking.
Opportunists.
This characteristic of the nationalist political parties must be attributed to the nature of their leaders and their supporters. The supporters of the nationalist parties are urban voters. These workers, elementary school teachers, small tradesmen, and shopkeepers who have begun to profit from the colonial situation in a pitiful sort of way, of course, have their own interest in mind. What these supporters are demanding is a better life and improved wages. The dialogue between these political parties and colonialism has continued uninterrupted. Discussions focus on improvements, electoral representation, freedom of the press, freedom of association. Reforms are discussed. It should come as no surprise, therefore, that a good many colonial subjects are active members in branches of metropolitan political parties. These colonial subjects are militant activists under the abstract slogan, power to the proletariat, forgetting that in their part of the world, slogans of national liberation should come first. The colonized intellectual has invested his aggression in his barely veiled wish to be assimilated to the colonizer's world. He has placed his aggression at the services of his own interests, his interests as an individual. The result is the ready emergence of a kind of class of individually liberated slaves or freed slaves. The intellectual calls for ways of freeing more and more slaves and ways of organizing a genuine class of the emancipated. The masses, however, have no intention of looking on as the chances of individual success improve. What they demand is not the status of the colonist, but his place. In their immense majority, the colonized want the colonist's farm. There is no question for them of competing with the colonist. They want to take his place. The peasantry is systemically left out of most of the Nationalist Party's propaganda, but it is obvious that in colonial countries, only the peasantry is revolutionary. It has nothing to lose and everything to gain. The underprivileged and starving peasant is the exploited who very soon discovers that only violence pays. For him, there is no compromise, no possibility of concession. Colonization or decolonization, it is simply a power struggle. The
It
exploited
actually
realizes
reminds me.
Mhm.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, this kind of reminds me of the revolution in China, of how it's mostly comprised of the peasantry. It reminds me of that.
Yeah. The exploited realize that their liberation implies using every means available and forces the first. When Monsieur Guy Mollet capitulated to the French settlers in Algeria in 1956, the Front de la Libération Nationale, as a famous tract stated, that colonialism only loosens its hold when the knife is at its throat. No Algerian really thought these terms too violent. The tract merely expressed what every Algerian felt deep down. Colonialism is not a machine capable of thinking, a body endowed with reason. It is naked violence and only gives in when confronted with greater violence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'll stop there. As they say in the Episcopalian tradition, the word of Frantz Fanon, thanks be unto Marx, Lenin, and Mao.
Hell yeah.
Wait, that's not the Anglican tradition. That's like the Anglican Marxist tradition, yes.
To say what? Sorry.
That's like a combination of the Marxian and the Anglican tradition.
Okay. This was this was awesome. I don't mind reading until page 25. It's not too long, so I will read at where you left off. Oh, sorry.
If you'd like, I can take a turn for those last few pages.
Sure.
Okay.
At the critical.
At the critical deciding moment, the colonialist bourgeoisie, which had remained silent up until then, enters the fray. They introduce a new notion, in actual fact, a creation of the colonial situation, nonviolence. In its raw state, this nonviolence conveys to the colonized intellectual and business elite that their interests are identical to those of the colonialist bourgeoisie, and it is therefore indispensable, a matter of urgency, to reach an agreement for the common good. Notice here how familiar this sounds. This is fucking neoliberalism right here.
Yep, literally. That's literally neoliberalism. You know, it's like, come on, we have the same interests. Come on, just come on. Like it's literally the exact fucking same thing. You know, it's literally just it's literally just people wanting to hold on to whatever privilege they have. That's literally it.
Right, because the fact of the matter is that when you tell somebody that their only option to fight back against systemic violence is to try to be nonviolent and ask your oppressor to please stop oppressing me, that you are there rendered fucking impotent.
Yep.
So back to the text. Nonviolence is an attempt to settle the colonial problem around the negotiating table before the irreparable is done, before any bloodshed or regrettable act is committed. But if the masses, without waiting for the chairs to be placed around the negotiating table, take matters into their own hands and start burning and killing, it is not long before we see the elite and the leaders of the bourgeois nationalist parties turn to the colonial authorities and tell them, this is terribly serious. Goodness knows how it will end. We must find an answer. We must find a compromise. Yeah, it's called Get the Fuck Out. Um, this notion of compromise is very important in the case of decolonization, for it is far from being a simple matter. Compromise, in fact, involves both the colonial system and the burgeoning national bourgeoisie. The adherents of the colonial system discover that the masses might very well destroy everything. The sabotage of bridges, the destruction of farms, repression and war can severely disrupt the economy. Compromise is also on the agenda for the national bourgeoisie, who, unable to foresee the possible consequences of such a whirlwind, fear in fact that they will be swept away, and hasten to reassure the colonists, we are still capable of stopping the slaughter. The masses still trust us. Act quickly if you do not want to jeopardize everything. If events go one step further, the leader of the Nationalist Party distances himself from the violence. He loudly claims he has nothing to do with these Mau Mau, with these terrorists, these butchers. In the best of cases, he barricades himself in a no man's land between the terrorists and the colonists and offers his services as a, quote, mediator, which means that since the colonists cannot negotiate with the Mau Mau, he himself is prepared to begin negotiations. Thus, the rear guard of the national struggle, that section of people who have always been on the other side, now find themselves catapulted into the forefront of negotiations and compromise, precisely because they have been careful not to break ties with colonialism. Before holding negotiations, most of the nationalist parties are content, in the best of cases, to explain and excuse this, quote, savagery. They distance themselves from the people's struggle and can often be heard in private condemning those spectacular acts that have been decreed heinous by the metropolitan press and public opinion. Their preoccupation with objectivity constitutes the legitimate excuse for their failure to act. But this classic attitude of the colonized intellectual and the leaders of the nationalist parties is by no means objective. In fact, they are not sure that this reckless violence is the most effective way of defending their own interests. Another thing is, they are convinced that violent methods are ineffective. For them, there can be no doubt any attempt to smash colonial oppression by force is an act of despair, a suicidal act, because the colonizers' tanks and fighter planes are constantly on their minds. When they are told, we must act, they imagine bombs being dropped, armored cars rumbling through the streets, a hail of bullets, the police, and they stay put. And they are losers from the start. Their incapacity to triumph by violence needs no demonstration. They prove it in their daily life and their maneuvering. They have remained in the puerile position which Engels adopted in his famous argument with that mountain of puerility, Monsieur Düring. Quote, just as Crusoe would procure a sword for himself, we are equally entitled to assume that one fine Friday might appear with a loaded revolver in his hand, and then the whole force relationship is inverted. Friday commands, and it is Crusoe who has to drudge. So then the revolver triumphs over the sword, and this will probably make even the most childish axiomatician comprehend that force is no mere act of will, but requires very real preliminary conditions before it can come into operation. That is to say, instruments, the more perfect of which vanquish the less perfect. Moreover, that these instruments have to be produced, which also implies that the producer of more perfect instruments of force, vulgo arms, vanquishes the producer of the less perfect instrument. And that, in a word, the triumph of force is based on the production of arms, and this in turn on production in general. Therefore, on economic power, on the economic order, on the material means which force has its disposal. End quote.
That
from
was
Frederick
good.
Engels.
That was a good way to leave off. Wow.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm
And
going
there we go.
to mark here that we start off next week at the top, page 26.
That was awesome. So, what do y'all have to say? Oh my God, I didn't see Tristan. Oh, it didn't show him.
Well, it just popped up on screen, so
Oh, it just popped up. Okay, I thought I thought he was there for a while. I was scared. I just accepted him. So hopefully he can. I just accepted him, so he's joining right now. But wow, what an amazing read! What do y'all have to say?
eye-opening, and it definitely is relatable concerning how colonization has affected indigenous here.
Indeed. It's just like, wow, he just goes over so many, good points. The cultural erasure and genocide of traditions, mythology, beliefs to subjugate and oppress the
The
non-white masses.
demonization, the
Yep,
demonization is quote unquote savages.
yep,
Yeah,
yeah,
fucking
exactly. And
British assholes.
yep, and I found it really amazing. I found it really cool how he specifically talked about the colonized intellectual and how due to bourgeois thought and reactionary thinking, he has convinced himself that his interests lie with their oppressors, and only through the intellectual colonized individual, only through them interacting with the masses, with the people, and cementing themselves with their materialistic conditions, can they become revolutionary. It's really beautiful.
I love the way he goes about calling out the liberal tactics of, oh, you can't use violence, or
Yeah.
like, you got to reform this via some kind of consideration for what it is that these bourgeoisie fucking colonizers want. And that he beautifully paints just how fucking ineffective that is, how politically impotent it is, and that if that's the route you're trying to take, you've already fucking lost the battle from the start.
Yep. It's just, it just goes that when push comes to shove, when the bourgeois are threatened, they will do any means to descale the situation. Oh, it doesn't have to get violent now. Come on, we can all resolve this. You just gotta vote a little bit, and everything will be all right.
Mm-hmm. And it's amazing too, because this was something that was kind of prophetic when you look at how things played out a few years later here in the States with MLK and the civil rights movement, and the CIA and FBI and all them, they weren't too fucking concerned with the work he was doing as long as he was preaching that liberal nonviolent shit.
Mm-hmm.
When they took him out was because he changed his tune. And
Exactly.
that's the part they don't fucking teach you about in school. All you learn about is the I have a dream shit and, nonviolent resistance shit. They don't teach you about the fact that he had to himself start carrying a side piece to protect himself, that he had to have armed security, often provided by the Panthers at events he was going to speak at, to protect himself. As soon as he had that realization and started talking to people on a real level of, holy shit, this path of nonviolence has only gotten us beaten in the streets and our lives threatened and or already taken. At that point, when he shifted the direction of those conversations to maybe we do need to take up arms and protect ourselves because we are on the receiving end of violence, that's when the fucking government killed him.
Exactly. And I've said this before. The U.S. will whitewash, demonize, and dehumanize any person, any historical figure, any prominent revolutionary in order to uphold their own interests.
Mhm.
They will either a co-opt, defang and co-opt your beliefs and use them to uphold their non-violence liberal bullshit, or they will portray you as some insane maniac who killed people who kill people unprovoked because you just wanted to, like Che and Malcolm X. They always teach you about Martin Luther King, but they never teach you about Malcolm X. They always teach you about Gandhi, but they never teach you about Thomas Sankara. They never do any of that
Right.
because they will only co-opt, they'll only defang those who they can as much as possible incorporate into their bourgeois narrative. And that's what they'll do because Martin Luther King, as well as any revolutionary who has ever lived, and anyone who has ever lived, was not a static figure. He was not some guy that stayed on that podium on I Have a Dream speech and never left. No, he changed. He evolved. His ideological and political leanings started to shift. And the reason why he died, the reason why he was murdered, was because he started to sound more like Malcolm X. That's why he was
Right.
killed. He started to sound more. He started to sound more like that radical that everyone hated. And the funny part is that when he was alive, he was literally treated as some monster who killed in the millions. There are literally propaganda posters literally portraying Malcolm X being quote unquote peaceful person, while behind him buildings are on fire to demonize him. And it was only after he died that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party could co-opt, change, and defang his ideological and political beliefs in order to incorporate it into their bourgeois fucking performative propaganda.
Mhm. Yeah, when it comes down to it, people need to understand, like, the reason why the system tries to paint anybody who fights back as quote unquote terrorists or whatnot is because they're trying to convince people you have to remain subjugated to state violence. We wield that monopolization on the violence. How dare you respond to violence with violence? You don't have that fucking right. You only have that right, like, if it's somebody, another citizen pointing a gun at you in your own fucking house or something, then okay, castle doctrine, you can protect your life. But if it's the state doing it, you should shut the fuck up and accept it and just die at our hands, because
Exactly.
you don't have the right to defend yourself against the state. And that type of mind fuck actually goes directly against what the laws of this country say, of you having not just the right, but the responsibility to fucking overthrow a tyrannical government.
Yep, literally. It's so ironic, It's so ironic how the quote unquote morals that this country was supposedly built on are the same ones that are shot down and denounced. It's very ironic. And I've actually said this. It's really interesting because the concepts of insanity and sanity are actually rooted within ableism, and more specifically where your allegiance lies. I mean look at how they always portray revolutionaries who were militant. They always portray them as insane monsters who killed in the millions unprovokingly because they just wanted to. Because if you just think, yeah, exactly. Because if people believe that these guys were just monsters, why would they care about what their actual ideological and political beliefs were? If they were just these quote unquote monsters that killed for no reason, why should you care about actually reading up on them and seeing what they actually believed in? It's a way of gaslighting. It's a way of demonizing. And and while people like Mao, people like Stalin, people like Fanon are considered, quote unquote insane, people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King are considered the sane ones. They're the ones who are reasonable, quote unquote.
Well, a big part of that is because a very deep psychological root behind colonialism and the capitalist system itself specifically is narcissism.
Yep.
And with that comes the gaslighting, comes the either over the top love bombing or the breadcrumbing of, see, look what we did for you. That means we purchased the right or the privilege to fucking abuse you. So you got to take our shit. And it's one of those things that you'll notice has been a huge boom of narcissistic behavior, and that's because it is fed by this type of system. This is something you would not see living in a communal type system. These things are ingrained during toddler age years.
Yep.
Where if you were living in a communal system, it's typically a large family group or extended family or chosen family, where if there is a narcissistically abusive parent, the child has other quote unquote parents to be able to turn to for positive influences. They are not dependent, or rather codependent, on appeasing the narcissist in order to just be treated with some fucking dignity and yes, to survive. Yep. They have other people they can count on. Therefore, that narcissism doesn't have room there to actually fucking grow and become a generational thing, because there's other means possible for these children to get their needs met. Whereas in a capitalist colonizer situation, everything is so individualized that either you as the child of a narcissist have to engage in that fucked cycle and appease the abuser and also get normalized and basically, how do I want to put this? It becomes a comfort zone. It becomes a comfort zone to be in that situation of that abuse cycle and actually start exhibiting narcissistic traits yourself. Even if you're not technically a narcissist who can be diagnosed with the total fucking lack of empathy, that's the coping mechanisms, that's the skill set that you learn to be able to fucking survive in that environment, and it feeds itself.
Exactly.
And that is a huge problem that has been absolutely fed by this type of system. And it's only when you break away from that that you can actually start to see how that system works and affects the entire society that has been colonized and forced under capitalist rule. Yep. Because at that point, the system itself is fucking gaslighting you in these manners and telling you your only option is reformism. Your only option is to try to concede to the bourgeoisie what they want and, beg them to concede what you want in return. And that's not the fucking case. That is not reality. That is the narcissistic, false, delusional framework of reality. That's the matrix. That's what the fuck they want you to believe. You have no choice but to live in and adhere to and participate in that vicious fucking cycle. Because if you step outside of their delusion, outside of their matrix, that's when you actually find the opportunity to put an end to the vicious cycle and overthrow the system. And they are trying to self-preserve by keeping you locked into it.
Exactly. Beautifully said, comrades. Beautifully fucking said. They want to actively make you believe that they teach you a distorted, warped sense of history. They always teach you one thing, that the way things are have always been this way. That there has never been any other, that there has never been any other way, that the way things are have always been the same way they are going to be, that things are never going to get better, and and the only thing we can do is simply get used with it and survive and live within this capitalist imperialist system. That's the only thing they ever teach us. And it derives especially from American exceptionalism. You know, the idea that the U.S. The idea that the U.S. has made history and nothing will ever be and nothing will ever come after the U.S. That everything just is now. That there was never that there will never be an after. But obviously, this idealistic, nonsensical bullshit. But in a dialectical and materialistic analysis, everything is constantly changing. Nothing is ever the same. Everything is always evolving. You know, nothing will ever be static or stay the same. It is through having that kind of analysis. It's through and what you said. It's through actually stepping out of that system and having that dialectical and materialistic analysis of how things are always changing and nothing is ever static that they fear the most, because the bourgeois have always feared one thing, and that is another socioeconomic system, another ideology challenging and overthrowing capitalist rule. That's what they have always feared. They always fear another type of way of thinking, overthrowing that individualistic, narcissistic, abusive, reactionary behavior. They're afraid of it because they know that's the only thing that's keeping them afloat.
That's why, just like a narcissistic parent, the narcissistic colonizer, illegitimate ass fucking tyrannical government rewards that which aligns with its bullshit. It rewards you for participating in neo-colonial behaviors of holding the gun to your own head rather than them having to hold it to your head. It rewards you for, you know, trampling all over everyone in your fucking path in order to prove your value with your adjacency to capital. It rewards all of this self-harm in order to feed that negative feedback system psychologically, emotionally, and even, you know, down to your survival itself of in terms of your class. It will perpetually lie to you and tell you, you know, the pull yourself up from your bootstraps shit, when literally that term was coined in order to show in what was supposed to be a humorous manner, this is fucking impossible to do. If you have boots on and you bend over and grab a hold of your bootstraps and pull up, you're not gonna lift your foot up. You're just gonna pull your upper body downward because gravity is overcompensating. Like it's literally fucking impossible. But it tries to tell you that if you just appease the system and if you just play your part and if you just accept the colonization and you just accept the bourgeoisie being the ones in control and treat them as if they are that narcissistic parent of, oh, you're the job creator, look at how much they've done for you, then you will have as much opportunity as somebody who was born into the bourgeoisie.
Exactly.
And the fact of the matter
Upward
is
mobility.
your likelihood of that is slim to fucking none. They want to pretend as if these fucking, you know, rare examples of people having broken out of whatever class they were born into is somehow the rule. No, they're not. They're the exceptions. And, you know, most people live and die in the same class that they were born into, because that idea of American exceptionalism, that idea of meritocracy is fucking bullshit.
Yep.
There's no appeasing the oppressor into no longer oppressing you. There's no begging the oppressor into no longer oppressing you. It does not fucking work. As Sister Asada Shakur pointed out, you cannot fucking ask your oppressor to stop oppressing you, and it actually happened. It doesn't happen that way. You have to actually put a stop to it. You have to stop feeding it. You have to stop engaging with it. On their terms, anyway, specifically. You have to engage in a different manner of going, okay, nope, you've chosen to devalue me. Now I'm going to devalue this system and point out all of its flaws, all of its failures, all of its fucking harms, and stand the fuck up against it and go, no more. I will no longer be your source to tap. I am not a resource. I am a fucking person.
Beautifully said.
Thank you. I try.
Is that your cat? I heard it.
Yeah, that's Nico. He just hopped in my lap for some snuggles.
Aw. Okay, so the Zoom call is running a bit long. It is currently 1 hour and 46 minutes, so it's probably best to leave it here so that way it doesn't run for too long. But this was amazing. This was awesome, and I hope every single last one of y'all have a wonderful day. And Tristan, I'm sorry that you came in late. Don't worry, the video will be uploaded, so whatever you missed, you'll be able to see it. But I hope you can. I'm glad that you came, and I hope they can come next time.
Yeah, thanks. Just like made it last second.
It's fine.
Yeah,
Don't
you
worry,
literally
comrade.
came in like right as we were wrapping up the last
Yeah.
of what we were reading for the day.
Yep.
But once the video is done downloading, I'll get it uploaded. There is a new YouTube channel
Super.
specifically for this. It is the United Panther Movement Book Club. That's the handle, that's the channel, that's the Gmail for it. So if you want to
Awesome.
hop onto YouTube and give that a subscribe, you can follow along with any of the videos, you know, and same for anybody else out there in the audience watching. And this has been fucking dope. I'm glad we finally got to kick this off. I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes.
Indeed.
I'll try to make
Have
it
a
next
wonderful
time.
day. Hell yeah. Have a wonderful day, comrade, and all power to the people.
All power, comrades.
All power to
All
the people.
power.